Printers, Part 3. In this nugget, we continue our discussion of printers, and this will be part 3, where we'll continue on with installation issues. Now, in the previous nugget, we talked about installation, and we had the advantage of using plug and play, but you don't always have that. You might not have a cable that's capable of bidirectional communications, or there might be a problem with plug and play. You might need to do a manual installation without the benefit of PNP. You also will not have plug and play when it comes to network installation, so I'll show you how to do that. And then we'll have documents that work in queue, especially if you're in an office where multiple people print to the same printer, and I'll talk to you about how to manage that queue, as well as how to configure various printer options and defaults. And of course, if plug and play doesn't detect the printer, you'll have to choose another method instead. One thing you could do is if you install a printer and plug and play does not seem to detect it for whatever reason. It might be that you're using an old parallel cable that's not bidirectional, for example. Then what you can do is to install it manually. You can go right up here to Start and then Printers and Faxes, which is also accessible through Control Panel if you happen to already be there. We see the printer that I already installed here, and there's also a fax. This is really the same physical printer, but two separate drivers for different functions, and the black checkbox indicates whatever your default printer is, so that if you're in a program and you just hit, you know, the pool button, the toolbar up at the top on the button there that has a printer on it, then it's going to print out to whichever printer has the checkbox there. All right, let's go ahead and see how we can add a printer, though. We just click over here to where it says Printer Tasks, click Add a Printer. We go ahead and click on Next. Again, hopefully Plug and Play takes care of a lot of this for us, but it might not always do that. And then we identify whether it's a locally attached printer. Now, since I don't actually have another printer attached, I'm going to kind of fake it here, and so I'm not going to use Plug and Play to detect the printer. And then I'll go ahead and click on Next. Then once I do that, I identify which port it's connected to, and I get LPT ports and serial ports being these COM ports that we see right through here. So I'll go ahead and click on Next here, and then I'll just select whichever printer it is. Now, hopefully, if it's a common printer that's been in wide use in the past, Microsoft will have already included a driver for it. For example, Hewlett-Packard is probably the most prevalent print manufacturer out there. So we can go on down through here and find a common LaserJet, which would be something like a LaserJet in the 8 series, so like this 8100 series. Now this one is a good example of showing that we have 8100 series using PostScript, the conventional PCL from Hewlett-Packard's printer language, or we could use PCL6, which is the current version. Again, PCL, I think, is going to be what you're going to be more likely to see configured on printers. Unless you're in a graphics design shop of some kind or something like that, then you might be going PostScript instead. So just select whichever one you need, and then go ahead and click on Next. And notice that what's going to happen here is, let me just quickly tangent. As we click Next and finish through all of this, we're going to see it copy the drivers to the local computer, but it's not going to beg us for a CD. Why is that? Well, that's because there's a file called driver.cab that's located on the hard drive that's installed as part of any common Windows 2000 and later installation, and it has all the drivers that you see in that list there. That list of printers that we just looked at, that was a list of printers that was built by Microsoft for this operating system. Anything that's listed there will already have a driver for us, compressed into that driver.cab file. It'll be extracted and put into the appropriate location. And then I can enter in a name for it. Here we get a little warning here that some operating systems or some programs don't support more than 31 characters. That would be something like an older DOS program or one that does not recognize long file names. Rarely, if ever, is that an issue anymore. So, but you do want to name this intuitively. If you're in a larger corporation, you know, it might be 6th floor printer in the accounting department. You know, not all that many words, but you might have a naming convention that kind of abbreviates that and yet is intuitive enough for everybody to understand. Do you want to use this as the default printer? I'm going to say no right now because it doesn't actually exist. So I'll go ahead and choose no for that, but it'll still be available. I can select it from a print menu if I want to. It's just that it's not going to be the first default printer. Then I can say whether or not I want to share the printer. I'm going to go ahead and say no for the time being, but we can address that later on if we like here as well, and we will. We'll go ahead and click on Next. And do we want to print a test page? This is generally a good idea if you actually have the physical printer attached to the computer, or if the printer actually exists. Since I'm just showing you how to install, I'm going to say no for the time being because it'll error out and give me a message. You know what, actually let me do that. Let me print a test page so you can see what the errors look like and how they pop up. And I'll go ahead and click on Next and then on Finish. Now it's going to take a while for that error message to pop up because it's going to take a few seconds here and so forth to identify that that printer doesn't actually exist, and it's going to have a timeout. Now then, if I do not see that, if I did have a printer attached and I it doesn't seem to be printing for some reason. Everything's plugged in, everything's attached. I got paper in the printer, I've got toner in the printer, and yet nothing's going to that printer, and I'm not getting anything coming out of it. Then what I can do here, if the test page did not print, I can click on Troubleshoot, and we won't exhaust this, but I just want to show you what this is. It's really the Help Center, and it takes you through a series of paths that you can go through, and you just answer whichever question is going on here. So you just identify what the problem is. My document doesn't print out at all. And then once you select this item, you want the troubleshoot to investigate settings on this computer. It can identify whether you've got it configured properly or not. Then you just hit next, and then you can follow these instructions to try to print the document again. Notice that it tells us to print from Notepad or WordPad. This is because this is not really as much of an issue as it used to be, like I said earlier when I talked about applications and compatibility with printers. But there might be something in the application that's causing a problem. The application might be corrupt somehow, for example, and it might be having trouble delivering that print job to the operating system and to the driver. So if you can print from Notepad, which is just about as simple a program as there ever was, then you can go ahead and, if you can print from that, then you can narrow down the problem as being application specific. You might just need to restart the application, and like all things Windows, in the last-ditch effort there, you might just have to restart Windows. Okay, that's kind of the magic answer for any Windows problems, is just restart. But anyway, I'm not going to go exhaust this, but it just takes you through next series of steps through a logical procedure that will help to identify and narrow down the cause of the problem and a potential solution. And this actually is pretty reasonably good, and I have used this on occasion myself in the past. Now notice here as well that it does show in this view that I do have one document in the queue. And if I double click on this little item down here on the status bar area or on the printer up here, both is going to open up the printer for me, and we can look at the contents of that. If the print job has been sent to the printer, it gets into its memory, and Windows is done with it, then this goes away. So a lot of times you won't see the printer item in the status bar area, but you can always go back to this location and double click here. Here it tells me that it is printing. It's still trying to send this print job to a non-existent printer. I'm kind of fooling Windows into thinking there's a printer when there really isn't one, and again, it's going to tell me after a while here that it was never able to print that job. Well, another thing you can do, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but it might as well show you while I'm here. If this job does not seem to be printing properly, or if maybe in an office environment where other people are also printing to that same printer, well, you will see other people's print jobs in here. And if somebody before you had a problem with it, maybe it jammed the printer or sent an invalid printer code or some corrupt page to the printer, then your job might not have gone through properly. What you can do is the A+ side of things. If you have the permissions, you do have to have administrative permissions with this printer. You can take someone else's print job and you can cancel it. Otherwise, if you have multiple people in here, there's trainer. If we have Jill and Joe and Bobby also with print jobs queued up down here. Well, Jill can cancel her print jobs, but she can't cancel Bobby's. Wouldn't that be nice? If you could cancel your co-worker's print job, their 67-page report that's ahead of yours, and you're in a bigger hurry than they are. Wouldn't that be nice if you could just cancel theirs? Well, you can't do that. Unless you're an administrator. So now I can go ahead and cancel this if I like, but again, I'm just going to let it error out for me here in a little while. Oh, and there it is. As if on cue. It tells me that there was an error. I don't know if you can see this word balloon down here, because sometimes they don't show up with the recordings, but it says the document failed to print. The name was test page. It tells me which printer it was that it had a problem with, and we get the alarming red question mark down here on the icon for that printer in the status bar area. Now, if I know that the printer is good and everything should be working fine, what I can do is to right-click here and choose to restart this job. By the way, what's this pause about? Well, as a courtesy, just as an example, maybe I do have a 500-page print job or something like that, some ginormous print job, and I got somebody else behind me further on down in the queue that wants to print something out just real quick. What I could do is to just pause my job, and then I would allow that. Anytime I'm paused, it kind of yields the right-of-way to any other jobs lower in the queue, and they can go up ahead of my job and they'll print. And then as soon as I resume, then it'll again take priority at the top of that queue. Also in this print queue, let's take a look at the printer option up here. I could go ahead and set this as the default printer. I could set print preferences. I'll return to that in a moment. Pause, which we just saw, just another way of doing this thing, where you right-click and choose pause. Same idea there. And then I could cancel all documents. Now, this is something that I can do from the menu here. Otherwise, if I can use my Control and/or Shift key and select multiple documents in here, right-click and then cancel them. But this allows me to cancel all of them. Again, I have to have administrative privileges on this printer in order to be able to do that. that, I'll go ahead and cancel these now since I don't really want that anymore. It will delete it out of the queue. It might take a little while to delete it, but after a minute or so, it'll go ahead and delete it. And then we can also go to use the printer offline. This is handy if you have a laptop computer, for example, and you know that as soon as you get into the office, you need to go ahead and print out a whole bunch of reports or invoices or something like that. Well, I don't have a printer attached to my laptop while I'm 30,000 feet in the air on a flight somewhere, so I can just use this offline. Then as soon as I connect to my printer, connect to my network and connect to my printer back in the office, or plug back in my printer, then it'll print it out again. As soon as I come back into this and reselect to use the printer online. So just so you have a visual clue, I'll click here to use the printer offline, and it tells me so as much right up there. And then I'll remove the checkbox once I get back into the office, and it'll try to print it out again. Then that's pretty much it. The other things we can do are to go to the properties of the printer. If we click on this, then it shows us just various properties such as whether or not it's shared, what port it's using, and things of this nature. And then let's just quickly identify some of the information we see on these various tabs here. Here we just could give some descriptive information about the printer. Location is very useful, especially if you have lots of printers in a corporate environment. You want to be specific about where that printer is and maybe what kind of printer it is or what its use is, especially in the comment field. That might be useful as well. And then the printing preferences is where you can set the defaults for how it prints. For example, most printers usually go, the portrait orientation, but if for some reason used this printer always in the landscape, then that would be its default, and I could configure it that way. The sharing we'll address a little bit later on, and then there are ports. The ports are where it's currently attached, but again, in the corporate environment, you're probably not going to be using LPTs. You might be using printer ports instead that are TCP/IP ports. I'm going to go ahead and move on down here, and I've added a couple of these manually, which you can do through adding port and then specifying an IP address. But one thing you might be interested in using is something called printer pooling. This might be the case if I have two identical printers in the print room. Maybe they're both this 8100 series printer, and when I print a print job, I don't want to accidentally get stuck behind someone's 500-page report. I might want to actually instead go to the other printer that's also in that same print room that has nothing in queue, and that will print out my job faster because it doesn't have to wait for the other person's. With printer pooling, I can use two ports, and what this means is it's going to still show, let me go back here, still going to show a single printer here. However, when I actually print out the print job, behind the scenes, it's going to look for whichever printer is the least busy and send my print job to the least busy printer port. Now, this is not an A+ objective. You don't have to know that, but it is kind of handy to know, and so I want you to be aware of it. Now, I'm going to clear printer pooling here, and I'm going to go ahead and go back up and go to our LPT port. I apologize for clearing that message that we just saw there when I clicked on yes. That just said that when I disable printer pooling, it will clear what my current selections were, and then I have to manually reselect another port to print through. Now here on the Advanced tab, we have a lot of things that don't really directly address A+ objectives, so I'm going to kind of briefly cover some of these. But first of all, this is always available, of course, 24/7, or available during only certain hours. This might be useful. So, for example, if I am an office worker that does long, very difficult reports that are hundreds of pages in length, for example, then maybe I don't want to always send my print jobs ahead of everybody else's that just have one-page memos. I don't want them to have to wait for my ginormous document. Well, what we can do is the administrators here, or A+ technicians, is we can make their printers available only during certain hours, maybe from midnight to 5 a.m. And that way, they can print their documents, but they will be held in queue until midnight, and then at midnight, it'll start to print that document out while everybody's at home sleeping, and then they just come in the next morning and pick up their jobs. You can also adjust the priority. Whatever has a higher priority, the higher number is, the higher the priority. That way you can set up the CEO's priority on his printer to be a higher priority than all the little peons in the rest of the office. Or perhaps in a more realistic environment there, you might have a front counter in a retail environment where you want to be able to print off a customer's invoice ahead of Billy Joe Jim Bob in the back office who's just trying to print out mundane reports that can always wait. If you want to change the driver or update the driver, you can click New Driver, and here we can spool print documents so the program finishes printing faster. This is a common Windows function. So let's say I've got 10 pages to print out. What Windows does is it takes that that print job, it sends it through the driver to properly format it, decides whether it's PCL or PostScript or whatever, and then it gives it the proper format, sends the first page out to the laser printer, and I'm thinking laser in this particular instance. Once the printer gets that first page, it'll just go ahead and start printing that one in good faith, assuming that the remaining 9 pages will be forthcoming after they're properly spooled. And that's what this default setting is to start printing immediately when it gets that first page. The other thing I could do is to start printing only after the last page is spooled. So on this computer, it'll spool all 10 pages out to the hard drive. Then when they're all spooled, it sends the whole job at once to that printer. Now, we don't really need to do that very often, but you might do that if you're getting some problems with what looks like incomplete print jobs going to the printer. But again, that's a rarity these days, so normally these default settings work pretty well. You can also print directly to the printer, which will not spool the jobs at all. One of the advantages of spooling is that it actually gives you an overall performance increase from the user's perspective working with their computer here. But if I print directly to the printer, it's going to slow me down on the local side of things. However, if for some reason we have spooling problems, I might just need to go ahead and do that. This could potentially be the case if I'm very, very tight on disk space and yet I print really large jobs, then I might need to print directly to the printer because spooling does use some hard drive space depending on the size of the jobs. You can hold mismatched documents if I'm printing out maybe to a PCL6 printer and yet my driver is configured for PostScript. Well, that would be mismatched. So it will not allow it to print out hundreds of pages of garbage, for example, of just miscellaneous printer codes. So I could hold it that way. As long as everything's configured properly, this checkbox here doesn't really mean much, though. I could print spooled documents first. This means that if I have a job that's only 1 page in length and it's already been properly spooled, but ahead of me in the queue there was a 100 job page, then my job will go ahead and go ahead of that 100 job page because it's already ready, might as well just go ahead and do its thing. You can also keep printed documents, which requires more hard drive space because it doesn't delete the spooled jobs after they've completed. This allows you to go back into the print queue and to restart or reprint jobs that have already been printed. Although on the front panel of many printers, you can also use that panel to scroll through previous print jobs and to manually reprint jobs there directly from the printer as well. And then finally, this enable advanced printing features lets me do things like changing the page order, the number of pages printed per physical page. You know, you can do things like instead of printing 1 page per page, you can set it up so that it reduces the size so that 4 pages print on a single page if you wanted to save paper or something like that. And then we go to the Security tab where we can identify what privileges someone has. Everyone is allowed to print to the printers. Once they print to the printer, they become a member of a special group known as the creator owner. Notice that the creator owner can manage their own documents. And this is what allows me to remove documents or to restart print jobs or cancel print jobs in the print queue, but not to manage somebody else's jobs in the print queue. And then, of course, accounts like members of the administrators or power users group have all permissions available for these printers. And this can be very useful for the A+ technician to be a member of one of these groups because you might have someone says that there's a print job in the queue. It's not that user's print job, it's somebody else's print job, but it's jammed up somehow or it's causing an error and nobody else can print because of that other user's job. Well, because we're a member of one of these groups, we can go into that print queue and we can delete other people's jobs or shift them around as necessary. And then finally, we have device settings where we can specify which trays are used for different things, what size paper is in different trays, and the like. Now, so far I've shown you how to install a locally attached printer through a parallel port or a USB port or something like that. But you also need to know how to do a network printer. That can be done a couple of different ways. So, for example, here I've got a computer, and here I might have a printer attached to that computer. It can be USB, a parallel port, it doesn't really matter. And then we have, paper coming out of the printer. I don't know what that really looks like, but it looks like a shoehorn. I don't know. But that's what we have here. We have the computer and the printer. Now, this user here says, wow, I love this printer. It's such a great printer that I ought to be able to share it with the whole rest of the world. So he says, I want to share with these other people on the network. Well, here's another user over here. What this user has to do in order to make this printer available, because look, this printer here is not connected to an Ethernet cable or anything like that. This might just be let's just say it's a USB connection. Well, by default, and the way it is right now, this user on the network has no way of connecting to that USB connection. So what they would have to do is they would need to go through this user's computer. This user will share this printer in the interface. I'll show you how to do that shortly. Once this is a shared printer, shared, then this user will be able to send a print job out of their print spool and over here to this user's computer, and then this user's computer will forward that print job on to that printer. In order for this to work, this computer must be turned on at all times. If this user turns their computer off at the end of the day, this user tries to send a print job, it will fail, and they'll get the same message I got with a little red X down here in the status bar area. So then, in order to make a printer available and share it, how do I do that? Well, I've just made a remote desktop connection here to one of my other computers in my office here. This is one of the ones that I use for a lot of my normal production. And we'll talk more about remote desktop later on, but it allows me to remotely control that computer from the computer that I'm locally seated at. And what I want to do is I know you're looking at this and saying, geez, James, get rid of some icons on your desktop, some shortcuts. Or some stickers, as my daughter would say. So anyway, I'll go to click on printers and faxes, and I go up to here, and I want to use this color LaserJet or make it available to other users because, hey, we have fancy color things we want to print out, right? So I'll right-click on this, and I'll choose sharing so that I can let other people use it. I'll simply click share this printer, give it a descriptive name if I want, and list it in the directory. This means that it'll be available in Active Directory's database for a domain environment. That's outside of our scope, but that would just make it easily searchable using Active Directory in an Active Directory domain. So now this is shared. That's pretty much all there is to it. I'll just close all of that out. And then on this computer, I still don't have that printer available yet. Look, it's not listed up here anywhere. So I want to add that printer and print across the network. Just like we see here, this is where I am right now. I want to print across the network to that computer that had all the stickers on it, and then be able to print out to that shared printer, right? So I'll go here to add that printer, start the same wizard we saw before, but it's going to be a network printer this time. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. I could browse for the printer. This is especially useful if I'm a member of the same domain in a corporate environment, but for our current purposes, I'm just going to connect to it directly. I'll just go whack, whack, and then Win64. Is the name of that computer over there that has the printer attached to it. Here it lists all the various printers that are available. It's listed in Active Directory this way with the full name of it, or I could just type in the short name of it. What would I call that? HP Color, I think is what I called it. So I'll just type it in that way if I want. And then I'll click on Next. It gives me a warning here that drivers can contain scripts that could be harmful. I know the driver is good and it's not going to harm my computer, so I'll click on Yes to allow it. Do I want to make it the default printer? Yes or no? I'll just say no for now, but whichever way you wanted to go. And then Next and Finish. That's pretty much it. The drivers will be copied to my local computer if they're not already there. And now this printer is available. I can right click on it, and to double check it, I'll click on its properties, and then I'll click Print Test Page to see if it prints out a test page for me. If it prints out OK, I'll click OK and OK. And I can hear the printer humming behind me and the lights blinking, and sounds like things are going on over there. So yeah, the test page is printing out all right. Notice that for shared network printers, it gives us this little network cable looking icon underneath the printer to identify it as a network printer. Now, one of the advantages of using a shared printer like this by printing through, from my computer over through somebody else's computer is that, yeah, I'll do some spooling on my side, but then I sent the whole job over here, and this is where the queue is held and maintained and everything, and I'm scot-free from all the work after that point. So it offloads a little bit of the work. It's kind of like last night I was watching my favorite TV show, American Idol, and I had my laptop on my lap with all these cables and other things that I was doing, and I got hungry for an ice cream bar. Well, wanting to offload the work onto somebody else instead of me, I said to my wife, honey, I've got my laptop and all these cables and everything, and I really need an ice cream bar. You ladies are going to hate me for this, I know. But she fell for it, and she actually went over to the refrigerator and got me an ice cream bar. Well, that's what we can do with this, too. We can offload some of the work. It's one of the advantages of having this kind of a shared printer. And just in case you ladies are mad at me for making my wife do that, just to let you know, I have to do work in the home as well. I flip the channels for my wife so that she doesn't have to work the remote. Okay, so it evens out in the end. Again, however, if this computer here, this Win64 computer, if this computer is sharing this printer, but this computer here is down, it's probably in pieces on some A+ technician's workbench somewhere, then I have no way of being able to print through it to get my job done. So what I can do then is to go to a different kind of a network printer. Now, first of all, let me delete this printer. And if you want to delete any printer, how do you do that? You simply select it, you hit delete on the keyboard. You sure you want to delete it? Yes. Finished. You're done. That's all you really have to do to delete one of these. But I want to add a printer now, and I'm going to add this in a different way because that printer that I just deleted had a USB connection that was connected to my Win64 computer. But that was the picture I showed you earlier, I think it was in a previous video, where it also had a network card in it where it had an RJ45 jack so that I could plug it directly into my Ethernet network, and indeed, that is how it's connected. So since this is directly connected to my Ethernet network as well, when I add this printer this time, how do you think I'm going to connect that network printer? Well, duh, you click on network printer, right? Well, no, actually, if it's a TCP/IP printer, you click local printer. Now, why would Microsoft make it that way, to attach a network printer to a local printer option here? Well, they do that to make it as difficult as possible for everybody, and so far they're doing a pretty good job. For TCP/IP printers, that's what you do, and you also do not select the plug-and-play printer, and then you click on Next. Now, in order to do this, I need to add a TCP/IP port, and because we're adding a port, that's probably why Microsoft considered it a local printer when we started this setup process. But I don't have a network port up here, so I'll need to create a new port, and it'll be a standard TCP/IP port. Then I click on Next, and it launches yet another wizard. So I'll enter in the IP address, 10.10. I think it's 60, and I can enter in a more descriptive port name if I want to, but I'll just leave it as it is, and click on Next. And then once I click on Finish there, then I need to specify a driver for this particular printer. Now, on this particular computer, I have installed this in the past, but if I didn't, I could just click on Have Disk and pull the drivers off of a CD or something. So here's the driver that's already been installed in the past. I'll click on Next, and I can keep the existing driver or replace it if I have an updated version. The one on the CD is the same as the one I have locally, so I'll just keep that. And then I can just enter in a name if I want to, and you can just make that as descriptive as necessary. And I can or not share the printer. I don't want to share the printer at this time, so I'll click on Next, and then ask if I want to print a test page. That's always a good idea to confirm that it's working properly, and then I'll go ahead and click on Finish. And then over here behind me, I'm looking at that actual printer itself, and I'm seeing a green light blinking on and off, which usually means it's receiving data, so it looks like it's printing out okay. In this nugget, we continued our discussion of printers, and this was part 3, where we started off by talking about installation, where we continued our previous discussion with plug and play and how that helped us to install printers. Now we have to do it manually if we don't have plug and play, or if we have some other reason for avoiding plug and play altogether. And then we can also install printers as network printers. It might be a printer that's shared from some other computer, or it might be a printer that's directly attached to my Ethernet network. Either way, I'll show you how to do that. I also showed you some things within the queue. You can cancel documents. If you have the privileges, you can cancel all documents, or you can otherwise manage the queue there. And then you can also configure many of the various options that are available with your printer. And I showed you that, as well as how to get your default settings. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.